Okay, so we have all of our presenters now on board, which is fabulous. And in another moment, but we've got 32 participants already, which is fantastic. If you wouldn't mind just popping your first name in the Q&A or the chat, it just helps you know that your system's working okay, and it helps other people know who's joining us.
Jen, I just got told that there's people in the waiting room.
Okay, Connor, you might be able to sort that. I don't have a waiting room.
It's a bit odd. People should just be able to get straight through. We didn't set up a waiting room for this one, so I'll take a look, but there shouldn't be a waiting room. Philip, is that for this meeting?
I presume so, unless someone's sending me info about another.
I don't believe there's a waiting room for this meeting, so it may be a different meeting that notification might be referring to, but I can certainly double check.
Okay, so it is 1 o'clock, so we'll get started on this information session. Hello to the 33 members of Queenscliffe and a whole lot more via Facebook Live. Thank you very much for joining us on the information session. I'm going to pass over to Phil Carruthers in a moment to formally welcome us. But as you'll see on the slide that I've put up there, you won't be able to turn on your video or your microphone, and the reason for that is that it helps to maintain a reasonable experience for everybody. But we do want your questions to come in. This is an information session, so please do so by typing in the Q&A or the chat, and we will get to those questions throughout the session. I'm going to pass over to Phil to formally welcome us. Thanks, Phil.
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for attending. I'm not sure where everyone else is zooming in from, but I'm on Wadawurrung land, and I pay my respects to the Wadawurrung people, in particular their elders, and especially any who may be participating in this session. I'd like to welcome our Mayor, Ross Ebbels, and Councillors Susan Salter and Rob Minty, and give apologies for Councillors Bob Merriman and Boyce Pizzi, who are unable to attend. The concept of a hub has been mooted for many years. It was originally funded as a modest connection between two separate buildings, but the project has benefited from a second injection of funds by the state government, followed by some federal funding, giving us a total of $5.75 million for the project. The project is being managed by two project governance groups, with broad representation from the community and the tenants, with Minister Lisa Neville generously giving her time to the community as chair of the steering committee when she has such a significant leadership role in the state's response to the COVID crisis. The purpose of the session today is to build community understanding about the detailed designs for the hub, and thereby to inform potential submissions as part of the statutory planning process. Now I'll hand you back to Jen Lilburn of Kismet Ford, who's assisting the project team with community engagement.
Thanks very much, Phil. Now we've had a question through the chat too. Can we please know who else is online? We can't produce a report that shows everybody online at the moment, but please attendees, please introduce yourself via the Q&A. Let other community members who know who is online. That would be fantastic. I'll just share the agenda for today. Shortly we'll have a overview from Kirsten Thompson, and as I introduce you, if you could just raise your hand quickly, panelists, so that community members can put a face to the name. Kirsten Thompson Architects have been engaged to produce the designs for this project, and we're all very keen to get some explanation about the plans that are now up on the Borough of Queenscliffe website. Then we'll go to the three tenants. So Kathy Ferenz, hi Kathy, Kathy's produced a video which is terrific, a video presentation. She'll give a 5-minute perspective about the new design from a library point of view, and then Steve Lee. Hi, Steve.
Hello, everybody.
Steve is from the Historical Museum. He will give a similar presentation of well, the perspectives from the museum's point of view, and then Phil, who you've already seen and who you know quite well, I'm sure, will give a perspective from the Visitor Information Centre point of view. And then during that time, I'm sure you will be providing us with a lot of questions, and we'll get to, at that stage, answer the questions. So all the presenters will stay. In addition, we've got Kelsey, who works with Kirsten. Hi, Kelsey. Lachlan Brogan, who is the project manager. Hi, Lachlan. And Gary Spry, who you'll know as the president of the Queenscliffe Historical Museum. So all of the panellists who you see here will be available to answer questions. We're due to finish at 1, but we don't want to draw a hard and fast line at 1 o'clock if there are still questions remaining. So we can go a little beyond that. But let's get into it. Before I pass over to Kirsten, I'll just share these principles, I suppose, to ensure that the meeting is successful for all attendees. And the first is using, as I've said, the Q&A function to introduce yourselves, but also to ask your questions. And that is how we will know what questions exist and we'll answer those. At this stage, we can't collect feedback. We're in a formal planning process now, so we won't be writing down feedback. That needs to be submitted formally to council. But I'd love us to use our time wisely today. So if you keep your questions brief, it's much easier for us to read those out and for me to point to the correct panellist or the most appropriate panellists. And if you could please try not to repeat your questions, repeat questions that have already asked. You'll see that there's a little like button in the Q&A function. You can like a question that somebody else has posted. That gives us all an indication that the question is something that more than one person is interested in. And please be patient with the technology. We are absolutely doing the best that we can today, but sometimes transition between presentations and speakers can just take a couple of clicks, a couple of moments. So I'm sure you'll be patient with us on that. I am going to now pass over to Kirsten for the first of our presentations. As I say, please enter your questions as we go, and we will get to those after Kirsten and the 3 tenants. So I'll stop sharing now and enable you to do so.
Thank you. Great. Kelsey, if I could ask you to share your screen, please.
Sure thing.
Thank you. Great. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming along today. We look forward to taking you through the design ideas and talking through any questions. Next page, Kelsey, please. A little bit of context and heritage about the design direction, talk you through the plans and some project images. Next. Next. So, as you are all well aware, it's a fantastic site for the hub and a really exciting opportunity to see these 3 facilities come together and, where beneficial, share some resources, but also to form a hub for community and for visitors as well. So on Hesse Street, a very sort of prominent and important location, and one of the things we started with when we first looked at the site was we thought, well, there's some beautiful assets on this site already, 2 magnificent heritage buildings either side of the site, including the post office to our north, Field Park, the opportunities there to make even more of that public open space, and then the magnificent original library building, which you can see in red there on the site, which we obviously, that shows the extent of it that we will be refurbishing and working with closely. And then you can see too, it has been extended in the 70s. One of our questions always is, can you reuse something that's existing already? It's a good use of resources and also has some other benefits for continuity of the site. So that portion that's blue there is part of what we're reworking for the new facility. The original museum is being replaced with the new structure. Important to point out that magnificent fig tree, which we are hoping to set up a glimpse from Hesse Street through to the trees, so an important view line through the site. Now on this too, we can see where the toilets are at the moment and the sorts of issues with those being down the side, down the back, and sort of safety and so on. One more thing just to say, it's a very important street, and that's fine, Kelsey, if you like to go to the next one. We would say that it has its frontage on Hesse Street, and if you like, that's the more formal entry point. But we would also like to see that in the new development of the hub, that the back onto the lane is also a considered interface as well, and is equally, if not more informal, a useful place for people to come and go from the facility, not just for cars. So there we get a sense of the site, bookended either side by the beautiful heritage buildings. And you can see at the moment that there is one of the key things with the project is how to give the hub some presence from Hesse Street, making it easy for visitors to navigate towards, but without impacting on, in negative ways, on the heritage. The other challenge was how we might integrate things like the bus stop and the public open space with the hub more generally to make it a really enhanced public space for everybody to enjoy. And in that regard, to bring something of the museum and visitor centre and library facilities or uses out into that space too. Next. So, next. So some key ideas. First of all, we looked carefully at what was in the museum collection. It's a range of different things like artefacts, tapestries, Indigenous artefacts, navigation artefacts, documents and films. Next. And they all have different ways of needing to be showed. But the other thing we're interested in is how we might bring some aspect of the museum out into the public realm. And so we wondered too about discovery and play becoming a part of the museum experience, especially from Field Park, and hence this idea we'll talk through of peepholes in the facade into the museum, which could be a further element anytime day or night where there's some interchange with the museum brief. Next. Other more traditional ways of displaying works, and I know we've talked a lot with the museum working group to balance the need for more traditional artefact display as well as more high-tech and digital display and more immersive experiences, all being considered in the design. Next. And further considerations, especially in the design of the facade, is how things to do with Queenscliffe's navigation history in its early settlement might inform some of the architecture. For instance, the Fresnel lens as both a mirrored, illuminated element and the sort of pattern making and refraction and reflections of that, which you'll see in a minute, informs some aspects of the facade design. Next. So to take you through the plans, the main plan, you'll also, for those of you familiar with the site, know that there is a considerable level change on the site as well, and one of the issues with the existing facilities is the different floor levels. So the intent here was to get a common floor level between the library and the museum and the visitor spaces, as including the auditorium, so that it's very easy, open, accessible facility for everybody to enjoy. So the other thing you can see here, we've got the library on the left-hand side, which includes the heritage building plus part of the 70s extension. Then we have a breezeway and a courtyard, which links with the visitor centre through to the auditorium, which can be divided into 2 spaces or 1 large space, and from the visitor centre / entry through to the museum as well. So you'll see along Field Park, there is 1 section which is, if you like, more open, which is to the visitor centre, and you'll see in a minute a more transparent facade, whereas behind the museum space, it's a more opaque facade. But that's where we think it works, where we're using the building to actually help define Field Park, to make it an even better space than it is now, to get a bit of extra sun in there, a little more openings, so that it can be used for more people in different ways. And you'll see too in a minute that some of the things we've included in the design of the landscape is elements like seats which integrate with the bus stop, for example, and other elements that could be used for embedding interpretive elements about the history of Queenscliffe, but also be used like urban furniture. So just going into the building from the entry, you can see it's sort of very clear view straight from the courtyard into the entry through to the auditorium, making it easy for people to wayfind. And of course the magnificent fig tree, which is in that view line from the breezeway all the way from Hesse Street. Next. On the ground floor, we have the storage component of the museum, the collection studio as well. And you can also see a little overhang of our upper level to have a more informal outdoor space, which is not only protecting the loading bay, but is also something that can be used for external makings, conservation, or just general community uses, because we thought rather than just using this for cars, we could make it another more informal community area, which makes a bit more of that beautiful tree as well to this side of the site, and some potential seating that could be incorporated within that. So it's a bit more multi-purpose. Next. Now, one of the questions I think that's been, that may come up or has been asked before is just how the new building relates to the existing. And what we've got here for you on the top is the elevation, which shows how the new building is sitting between those 2 existing heritage ones. But important to say, and as you can see in the views shortly, it is set back, it's further back because of Field Park. So really Field Park is the main presentation to the street as it is now. It has 1 less tree, and the reason for that is to make the entry to the visitor centre and the open space just a little more accessible, a little more inviting, and if you like, provide a more a strong public square for use by everybody. You can see the breezeway is quite a delicate way of attaching to the original library building, but all in all, what we're doing is not seeking to imitate those heritage buildings, but rather to do quite a gentle but simple built form that is set back from them, bookended by them, so that it's actually quite a sort of low-key response, but adequately clear in the direction to the entry. Next. So just to take you through some images around that. So here we are, if we're at Hesse Street, looking towards the entry, and you can see that the main part of the facade has the more solid section, which is a folded concrete with the peepholes, whereas to the other edge, it's more transparent, and that's leading into the visitor centre. So it's sending very strong cues of where to enter, which is through that courtyard space, also imagined as a nice little pocket of semi-weather protected space for people to just enjoy, perhaps read and so on. You can also see in the foreground some of these little furniture elements, we're calling them urban furniture, in that square, that not only provide seating areas for people, but also things to stand up against, and you could incorporate interpretive elements within those, also potentially artwork. These are things that we're working through at the moment. You'll see too that the main level on-grade access from the street through to the visitor centre to all of the key spaces, whereas to the northern edge where the steps are is how we're managing that change and turning that stepping into a more positive landscape opportunity for people to sit, lovely afternoon sun in the shade of the tree and so forth. Next. So that shows you on approach to the entry courtyard, the view through to that beautiful tree, and you can see that while it's a new building and it doesn't look like the heritage buildings, there is a nice separation and distinction between them, and that lovely break between the new building form and the library with that breezeway is a good way to use sort of indoor-outdoor spaces as the linking space. Next. Then once inside, on arrival, you can see looking east towards the tree, and you can see on the left-hand side through to the auditorium space, or the access straight down towards the rear of the site towards the tree. You'll see on the right-hand side, that's a sort of lovely indoor-outdoor type space which links towards the library, where you might sit and read a newspaper or be waiting for someone pre-event in the auditorium. On the left-hand side, you can see where you might orientate yourself if you're wanting to go to the museum. Next. And this is from that same spot looking back towards the library through that linking space. Next.
Just a couple of minutes left, thanks, Kirsten.
Sure, no problem. From that breezeway space out to the back, so you can see that the whole of the site is being used from front to back, and that's been one of the key bits of feedback and endorsement from the OVGA, the Victorian Office of the Government Architect, commentary around how to link front and back of site. Next. And then inside the auditorium space, which I said earlier could be two smaller spaces or one large area. And you can see the contrast of these buildings, which feel a bit more sort of lightweight and a bit more open compared to the heritage buildings either side. So there's a nice contrast there. A use of timber as well as other sort of more natural materials, so it has a warmth through simple material use. Next. And then from the back, that's just describing the potential for a lovely landscaped area around the base of the tree. You can see that breezeway that links all the way to Hesse Street with the stairs up that way, dropping us down to that more informal community slash multi-purpose space associated with the loading dock and store below. Next.
Everything.
Okay, we might just go back to the front, and I think that's probably it. Look forward to answering some questions shortly. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kirsten. And Kelsey, I'm not sure whether there's a bit of background noise, traffic noise and so on, so I might get you both to put your speakers on, your audio on mute. Thanks. Okay, thank you. What a great overview, a lot to cover in just 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Kirsten. And I can see some questions already coming up that we will get to. Next will be Kathy. I'll just go to your video. Thanks, Kathy. That will just take me a moment.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Ferenc. I'm from the Geelong Regional Library.
Sorry, I'll enable you to see the screen at the same time. That might be helpful.
While Jen's getting that set up, everyone, just a reminder that if you do have a question, down the bottom of your screen, you should see a button that says Q&A. If you're on Zoom, just press that button and type your question in. And at the end of the session, we'll be able to respond to your questions. So you don't have to wait until the end to ask the question. If you've got something that's front of mind now from Kirsten's fantastic presentation, please feel free to pop it in the Q&A box there, and we'll get to it at the end of the presentations.
What great filling in. Thank you very
My
much,
name's
Connor.
Cathy Ferenc. I'm from the Geelong Regional Library Corporation. In a nutshell, just a little bit about us. We're a highly successful partnership of 4 member councils delivering shared library services for the City of Greater Geelong, the Surf Coast Shire, Golden Plains Shire and the Borough of Queenscliffe. Independently assessed and ranked as the #1 performing library in the state for 5 years running. This assessment includes service delivery, quality, community participation, operational and financial efficiency. This slide describes the ways that libraries contribute to community well-being. We strengthen communities through information and
Jen, the sound has stopped on the video.
Jen, I think maybe if you unmute yourself,
Yeah, I'll
and
try
give it
that.
another go.
by providing welcoming,
Is that okay?
useful and safe community space that is open to all members of the community from all walks of life. We generate huge amounts of economic benefit, activity and development, and in fact a published study by SGS Economics demonstrates that for every $1 invested in public libraries, $4.30 of benefit is generated with local communities. Queenscliffe residents love their library and are a reading community with a huge active membership rate. 90% of residents in the borough of Queenscliffe are members of their local library, in comparison to the broader library network where the average is 41%. In addition to that, 9.3 visits per capita annually compared to the network average of 6.3. 16.6 loans per capita annually compared to the GRLC average of 8. And as you can see, the use of technology is quite high as well, with figures representing both internet PCs and Wi-Fi, which is available inside and outside the building. Our biannual library customer satisfaction survey has indicated that Queenscliffe members rate their library satisfaction as very high, 9.4 out of 10. The community appreciates access to a range of facilities and services and have expressed that they value the staff, the collection, spaces to read, study and work, and access to PCs and Wi-Fi. Access to lifelong learning and cultural programming is attended in big numbers. The library as a safe space was highlighted, and this is particularly important with 71% of people visiting on their own. The library is considered a vital community and cultural hub for the community. Suggestions from the survey respondents was a bigger library. It's too cramped and there's not enough people and seating space. This is something that you would like to see more of. A bigger and refreshed collection. Self-check with RFID technology, allowing users to navigate the library independently. More technology and longer opening hours. This slide describes the opportunities from our perspective, the GRLC perspective, for the library in the Q Hub. These opportunities are informed by 8 guiding principles as described in the GRLC infrastructure plan as follows. New libraries will meet national standards and guidelines. There is equity and fairness in development and renewal. Local community needs will drive library design and renewal. Libraries are for everyone and engender pride in the community. Libraries will be accessible to all and feature universal design. Libraries will be future-proofed, built and redeveloped for the future, incorporating environmentally sustainable design principles. New libraries in the region will be developed in partnership and or located with other services. Libraries will be primary access points for new and emerging technology. And we are reimagining the service delivery in this new space. Public libraries are highly successful anchor institutions and attract high levels of activity and by far are the most socially inclusive. There are operational efficiency opportunities through systems and service integration and co-programming and service co-delivery. After all, we're all in the same business, delivering information, learning and culture. Libraries are terrific spaces for housing the past, the present and the future. Shared public space to maximise floor area and project dollars, for example, space for programs, exhibitions and events, can be used by library, visitor information centre and museums, and when not booked or in use, can be made available for public as reading or meeting space. We are working towards a service design that facilitates working together and integrating spaces, will ensure that we bring to fruition a fit-for-purpose space that meets the needs of all stakeholders and provides flexibility in order to adapt and change for future needs. I thank you very much for this opportunity and thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Kathy. I'm going to go straight now to Steve Lee to give a perspective on behalf of the Queenscliffe Historical Museum. Thanks, Steve.
Yes, thanks, Jen. Good afternoon, everybody. I have had the pleasure of being with Gary Spry, our president, and we have represented the QHM, the Queenscliffe Historical Museum, at meetings with the architects and the project throughout the process so far. The design of the hub is as elegant and uplifting and inspiring as the QHM was hoping it would be. KTA, Kirsten Thompson Architects, have designed a building which blends with the two heritage buildings either side and is a welcoming presence without forcing itself on the heritage streetscape of Hesse Street. My comments this afternoon will focus on the plan of the new facilities for the QHM. The museum display space is the same as the existing museum, but the QHM is determined to revitalise how that space is used and to be a vibrant and innovative regional museum. A museum consultant has been appointed by the QHM to develop an exciting design concepts for the new displays to attract visitors of all ages. The shared auditorium will be used to show modern films and a selection of the nearly 200 heritage films in the QHM's collection when it's not being used by either other tenants or the community. The museum's research unit is expanded with greatly improved facilities to cope with increasing numbers of volunteers and students researchers from Deakin, Monash and Melbourne University researching the history of Queenscliffe. More of the collection will be in storage, with displays changing more often to continue to tell fresh stories to encourage return visits by tourists and the community. The basement storage has been expanded to cope with this extra need and will have climate control for the protection of the QHM archive and of original documents, photographs and textiles. Collection management is an important task for the QHM. The basement collection studio is an exciting new feature for our volunteers who work in this area. This is where artefacts are in the collection can be conserved and new items can be assessed and scanned and photographed prior to being added to the archive database before either putting on display or being put into storage. This will also be used to develop the changing displays in the display area. The Research Centre, Storage and Collection studios are major improvements for the QHM, and the volunteers are very excited about seeing this building completed and to move in to start work on the collection, the research, and make sure things are stored safely. The QHM Committee of Management is pleased with the layout and the connections in the design and are determined that the museum will become an exciting regional museum of which Queenscliffe can be proud. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Steve. I'm going to now pass to Phil to talk about the perspective from the Visitor Information Centre perspective. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Jan. The Visitor Information Centre, or VIC, has around 37,000 people through its doors every year. It's open 7 days a week and every day except the 25th of December. It's staffed with 1 full and 2 part-time staff members and around 35 to 40 volunteers who both staff the office and conduct tours around the borough. In the new building, the VIC is about the same size as the current VIC, but better laid out. The layout will be open and welcoming and have a feature wall that everyone will be able to see as they walk in, which highlights the attractions of Queenscliffe and Point Lonsdale. It will also have a nook where we will hold tourist information about other locations, particularly the Ballerine. There will be a small office space and a small and quiet counter space where members of the community can transact other council business. The visitor experience will be quite different. In addition to the traditional distribution of brochures and referral of visitors to accommodation and tourist destinations, the borough is seeking to embrace technology to assist visitors. And whether that's by throwing vision from a PC to a large screen TV during discussions with visitors, or wirelessly transferring directions to mobile phones, or providing electronic information at sites actually outside the museum but around the town, is yet to be fully determined. The VIC is located at the entry to the building, which allows it to provide a welcoming concierge service for the rest of the building. The VIC team leader will also provide the management services for the hub, so the booking of the auditorium, security, building maintenance, and so on. Thank you for your time. You're on mute, Jan.
It gets me every time, that mute. Hopefully you have been storing up some questions and typing those in. We've got 12 unanswered questions so far. I have put up the names of the presenters there, and I will be going to them for the questions that are appropriate to them. So the first one is a double question, and it's related to the program space. What will that be used for, and whether the library has been extended at all? Kelsey or Kirsten, are you best to answer those questions, or Kathy?
Kelsey? Oh yes, Kathy? Is Kathy
No.
there? I wasn't sure if she was.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw you, but yeah, okay, great. And Kelsey?
Yep, so I can speak to the areas. So the existing library is 223 square metres. It's increased to 229.5. Just noting that the design is a more efficient use of the space. Kathy might be best to speak to what will happen in the programmed area.
Yeah, so you'll be pleased to know that we're retaining the reading room, and we know how important that is to the Queenscliffe community, but it will look lovely with a lounge area near that beautiful fireplace, and some quick reading materials in that space. And then across the way where the Vic is now will be where we'll utilise that space for programs. So there'll be some flexible furniture in there that we can move around, some activity tables, shared study tables, that sort of thing that can be moved in and out, and seats put in if we've got a poetry reading or an author event or something like that. And as Kelsey said, just a more flexible and more efficient use of the space.
Great, thank you both. The next question is related to the retention of field park trees. How many are to be in the final design? So how many of the existing trees are to be in the final design? And there's a question there also about the building facade, whether that's in keeping with planning scheme, heritage overlay clauses and the streetscape.
Okay. I can jump in there. Just to say, one of the trees is being retained, the West Australian eucalypt, and the discussion around that has been an aim to keep existing trees, unless of course they're obscuring too much of the new facility. So there was the feeling that keeping both trees would mean that the building was too obscured, making navigation a little tricky, but also just more broadly leaving enough, if you like, ground area for people to occupy as well. And there was the sense that both the existing trees were a little overbearing on the space. So that's about the trees. The next comment, there's a couple of comments about the facade more generally and being in keeping with heritage. Look, one of the things that's quite important in a heritage context is to find ways in which new buildings are not seen to be copying the valued heritage, but rather that they complement. And sometimes the best way to do that is to be what might look quite different in form, and in this instance quite simple forms compared to the more ornate heritage buildings either side. But we do think in this instance really what's very important is how the front is really presenting as a lovely public realm, a public place for gathering, and that the new building and its facade is quite a lovely gentle backdrop to that. So the other thing, it's not overbearing, it's not too over patterned, it's just quietly helping define that lovely public open space for Field Park. The other thing we would say is that it does have both a transparent part of it. I think there was a comment, is there any reflectivity or glazing? Yes, there is. Around the visitor centre and the entry space, it's much more open. You can see in, and strong sense of people in there in an active space. And the other end of it, yes, it is suggested as concrete, with the folds and the peepholes. So it creates a little bit of mystery and intrigue, especially with the peepholes. But again, it's a lovely backdrop for the shadow play of the trees and for that open space. So in that sense, it's allowing the two heritage buildings to still maintain their strong presence. They're the main event, if you like, either side, with this lovely open space between them, and the hub sitting slightly back from that, helping to form up that open space. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. And your video has gone to Kirsten. I'm not sure whether that's intentional or not.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. So heading down, we've had a number of questions there. I think you answered in the one lot. The peepholes, there's a suggestion of them even being a little larger, which is interesting, given COVID.
Interesting. Look, I should say too on the peepholes, and it is fascinating all the comments we're getting at the moment about what to do post-COVID in terms of building design. especially touch points. Look, the way in which those peoples work, it is for us to develop in the next stage of the design, but it's really to say that there's this nice opportunity for us to tell some stories outside about what's happening inside, and more engagement for children, so that your demographic of the museum is expanded to include young ones as well as older ages. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I do notice a couple of questions coming through the chat. Rather than go from chat to question and answer to chat, I'm going to go through all of the questions in question and answer first, and then I'll go back to chat if you've had trouble not putting them in question and answer, and pick up any that are there. This might be a question for you, Lachlan, with respect to fig tree protection and ensuring the roots are not damaged. And it is also related to the concrete piers.
Yes.
With respect to tree protection, sorry, yes.
No worries. So at the moment, for soil retention, we're looking at using board piers, just given the close proximity of the new museum to the roots of the fig tree. So we have engaged an arborist to provide a tree protection management plan and an impact assessment of the development on the root structure of the fig tree. So depending on what exactly comes back from that, we'll be able to finalise in more detail exactly the best ways to, first of all, protect the fig tree, and then also allow the development to continue alongside with no damage happening to the fig tree.
Yeah, great. And just that comment there, or that question regarding concrete piers, just to confirm whether that's the case.
Yeah, so at the moment they're the board piers I was talking about. So at the moment,
yes,
that's
sorry.
what will be at the moment, but we'll finalise that throughout contract documentation.
Yeah, and as you say, with the objective of protection of the trees. The question relating to amenities lost and gained in 24/7 public access to the toilets. Philip, I might switch to you for that, and then Kirsten can pick up any leftover bits of that answer.
Sure. I saw a couple of the questions. The building will have public toilets, and they'll be available at all times that the building's open. So 7 days a week, which it isn't at the moment, and 9 to 5 on most days, at least 9 to 5 on all days. The toilets are located back in the building rather than at the front of the building, which has been the focus of a number of questions. In the building, they're safer, and they'll cater better for mothers, in particular those using the library. When we designed the building, there were two reasons why we didn't put the toilets at the front. The first was just competing space. When we took the jigsaw pieces and tried to fit the tenants into the building in spaces that were most usable for tenants, we couldn't fit the toilets at the front of the building. The second reason was aesthetics, in terms of, it's a major public building, not a major public toilet, and just not having them in that high visibility location was a consideration.
Thank you. And in terms of any loss of public amenities, I think you've covered that, Phil.
Just one other thing would be that when we have major events, so one person asked, well, what about during the Winter Arts Festival or major events? Well, we envisage the community using the hub for major events. So if the music festival's on, we envisage the auditorium perhaps participating as part of the music festival, or as part of the literary festival or the low light festival. So the toilets would therefore be available for those major public events. And council officers are giving some thought to what's the alternative on a normal night. A normal weeknight, if the restaurants are open, What's an alternative there? We haven't had a chance to discuss those with council yet, so I can't go into any detail, but we've been thinking about it.
Thank you very much. Disability access considerations, is that best for you, Kirsten? But front and rear of the building.
Sure. Look, as we mentioned before, the main grade is the same throughout all of the key facilities. And so you have the primary level of Hesse Street all on grade. There is a lift inside the building which can take people down to the lower level as well, and which is also accessible from the rear of the site too. So much more accessible than current and fully accessible for everybody. Anything, Kelsey, you'd add to that?
Yeah, I guess just that the peephole portion of the facade as well is fully accessible to wheelchairs. So that could be accessed from the south without needing to use the steps at all there.
Fantastic, thank you. And Kirsten, while we have you, there's another question regarding, are there inspiring examples of modern and historic buildings being integrated into a streetscape like the proposed Q Hub?
Oh, that's always a good question. We do have lots of precedents of favourite examples of new architecture and heritage architecture coming together, and something which is very dear to our hearts and something we spend a lot of time contemplating and doing. We could probably gather some examples of that. I will say one dilemma we always find is that there's never a precedent that is exactly the situation we have to hand. So while we could show some examples of things that we think are nice examples elsewhere, there's always that issue that they're not dealing with exactly the same set of issues that we have to hand. So sometimes they're limited in their usefulness, but that's something we, I think, have in some of our look and feel images in past presentations that could be useful.
Great, thank you. Just to clarify for people, we now have 43 people online, which is fantastic. We are, as we mentioned at the start of the meeting, that we're unable to collect feedback, and there are a number of comments that if I can, I'll sort of turn them into a question so they can be answered. But just so that the audience is aware that because of where we're at with the statutory planning process, we can't formally take on comments through this process. And the comment that I was referring to, Kathy, is at 137, which is relating to the library. Oh, it might be more about the library entrance rather than the library itself. It may be a better question for you, Kirsten, now that I read through it. In terms of access, I think we're talking about potentially through that breezeway as well as where the old library entrance is.
That's right. So the main entry point will be through the breezeway, but it's also still possible from the existing one on Hesse Street. That's correct, isn't it, Kelsey? Kelsey, that we have the... Hello, you're on mute. Thanks, Kelsey.
Through further discussion with the library, it's been decided that it's best to just have the one entry through the breezeway, partly because it's a one staff library, and just for that, surveillance point of view. But that existing library entry will be maintained from the outside to still look the same, but it'll only be used as an emergency exit.
Great, thanks.
Can I add to that too, please? Yeah, Jen, thanks. It's also allowing us to use that foyer space a little bit more efficiently for some special collections, such as the Queenscliffe Maritime Museum as a good example. So at the moment, it's a fairly vacant space that takes up quite a reasonable footprint. So we thought we would be able to utilise that a little bit better by making that entrance just an emergency entrance. And then funneling people past the service desk, which makes it a little bit more efficient for the staff, as Kelsey said.
Thanks.
Okay, there's a question there about signage on the new building to identify that it is the Museum and Information Centre and Library. Who's best to answer that one?
look, we have had some initial thoughts about signage, and one of the terrific things is that that existing heritage building has library on it, so that's a good bit of existing signage, but also that from those little elements you saw in Field Park, the pieces of urban furniture as we describe them, we can also see opportunities to introduce signage within those as freestanding elements to help navigate visitors, and some of which may be on the building as well. Kelsey, anything you'd add to the latest on signage?
No, that about covers it. That's something that we're working through in this final phase.
Okay. Just a time check, we're at 5 to 2. I think I said it before that we would be not holding hard and fast at finishing at 1. I did mean not holding hard and fast at finishing at 2. I understand if any of the presenters need to leave right on 2, but I do understand that there are a lot of questions here that people are very keen to get the answers for. Joan has sent through, I think you've already talked about the facade and the hard concrete look, Kirsten, but perhaps that idea of shade in that that front sort of court or frontis area, that public realm area. Could you comment on that, please?
Sure. You can hear me? Yes. Yeah. Look, a couple of things. I know concrete is often talked about as a very hard material, but we think it can be used and have a real softness actually. And what I was saying before was just knowing that that's a space that faces west as well. So in the afternoon, sun coming through the trees, it's, we think, lovely opportunity for the trees and the landscaping combination with the concrete is quite a lovely solution. And the shadow play that you get across the facade from trees is really a very important part of the architecture. So that's anticipated, and in part why we chose that material. It's also a resilient material, and we think in combination with the glazed and more transparent and reflective part, you get a lovely contrast between being very explicit and open and being a little more mysterious. So.
Great, thank you. And I think you've covered off that question there, or that comment, or no, sorry, question there, Phil, about the toilets. When the museum is shut, you were saying that the building will be open not 24/7, 7 days a week, but 9 till 5, and additional when there are events. There is a question there about all of Field Park trees being retained, and you said before, Kirsten, that one of the eucalypts is coming out. Is there anything more that you can do to answer that question?
Look, I think it's always a tricky one, how many existing trees you retain, but in the end, the two key considerations was retaining one of them because it provides a good level of shade and it is a mature plant, but it's still, the removal of the other enables us to create a slightly more open space for easier enjoyment of that area and to give a bit more presence of the facility from Hesse Street rather than it being all submerged by trees, which at the moment it is a little bit hard to get a sense of the hub. And it's really important that it's not just locals who are familiar with it there, but visitors who can clearly identify that as a welcoming, open public place.
A question there, and you may want to put up the slide again, Kelsey. I'm looking at Chris's comment at 143 about the visual impression of the building within the streetscape and how it relates to the bus stop, and how it fits between the post office and the library. Of course, it's incorporating the library, but could you speak to that one, please, Kelsey or Kirsten? You're on mute, Kirsten.
Thank you. Look, this shows it's interesting because there's I think an earlier version we had of this, where you could also see the post office, and I think it probably is important to say that if you were to stand further back, you would get a very strong sense of the post office and the library building as the two bookends for Field Park. And that's really the main event. And then the building sits back from that and is really quite a gentle backdrop to to that park setting. So that's a key intention. Noting too that both the library and the GPO are quite ornate and detailed and elaborate. So we thought it was best to not overly compete with that by having quite a restrained, but we think what will be experienced as quite a gentle building for that space. So really too, in terms of the location of the site, this field park has been there for some time, and so its presence as a park being the main way in which the site presents was an important consideration in finding a solution acceptable to, for instance, our heritage architect on the project.
Great, thank you. I'm not sure, this may be a question for Philip in terms of an Indigenous name for the hub. Given the lack of Indigenous names currently being used in the borough, is that something that council could consider at some stage?
Sure, thank you. We're currently consulting with the Wadawurrung people on how to integrate Indigenous themes into the building. So thank you for that suggestion from John, I think, and we'll certainly consider it.
Great, thank you. Question there about, you've already discussed about the trees, not so much in relation to the climate emergency though, Kirsten, and the question there about the roofline services and them not being visible. I'm looking at David's comment at 145.
Is that something you're seeking comment on, or?
Is there scope to see the roofline services over the roofline that are above the roof?
Mm-hmm. I think, I'm not sure if I'm interpreting this correctly, but one of the reasons for having the parapet wall, so to speak, is because we can put the building services behind that so they're not visible from the main public realm. That's correct, Kelsey, with the height of, that's what sets the height of that.
Yeah, that's correct.
wall.
The services platform sits further back and below that roof line, below the parapet line, so we won't see those.
That's fantastic, thank you. We have answered the question about stairs and steps and access. Kelsey, you spoke before that there's actually more accessibility to the building from both ends than there has been before. Staff room appears to be in the toilet. But could you speak to that in reference to the floor plan, please?
Sorry, Kelsey, I'm going to hand over to you because I do
Sure.
have to depart at 2 o'clock, but also I'm sure we can
no
talk
problem.
through that one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsten.
So the entry to the staff room is quite a way away from the toilets. So the toilets are further down the corridor. But it is actually a beautiful spot in the building to have the staff room. It's directly opposite the fig tree, so there's lovely large windows which look out into the foliage there. So we feel like it is actually a great location for that staff room.
Okay, that might have been a little unclear when Lindsay looked at it. There are still a number of comments, I suppose, about the public toilets accessibility. You've answered that question, Philip, so I'll move on from those. Drawing of the streetscape in Hesse Street from the library all the way down to the post office. That hasn't been done, I understand, Kelsey. It's just the picture of, or the view of the front of the building that you've got there.
Yeah, that's correct. That's all we've got. We've got line drawings of the elevation there, but not the 3D images, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay. Design of the brick part of the building looks 1970s with pale bricks and narrow windows. Why?
That portion of the building is existing already. I believe it was built in the 70s, hence its appearance. So as part of our sort of ESD initiatives, we wanted to retain that part of the building, just for a carbon sort of emissions point of view. And yeah, so hence maintaining it in its existing form is the most sort of efficient way of doing that.
Okay. Could you clarify, and I know Kirsten has spoken a couple of times now about the trees, could you just clarify that there is only the one eucalypt coming out? I'm looking at Joan's comment at 157.
Yep, that's correct. So the more northern tree near the GPO, that's remaining, and then the one next to that will be removed. There are a couple of other smaller trees on site which needed to be removed because of their locations and where the new building is going, but those weren't part of the field park.
Okay, thank you. Toilets again, in terms of separate toilets for staff and volunteers at the museum, library and VIC. Will they be separated for staff and volunteers?
That's correct. There's public toilets, and then there's a separate staff toilet as well as a separate DDA universal access toilet.
Okay, thank you. Philip, the Latrobe bust, do you know where that will be placed?
I'm sorry, I don't know the detail on that, Jen.
Is there anybody who does?
Part of, in confirming what will happen with that, part of that is Indigenous engagement. So we'll have to work with them around Field Park and what the best sort of solution around that is.
Okay.
So we'll develop that through this next phase.
Thank you. Is there a signage plan available? I'm looking at Gary's comment at 2 o'clock.
Not at this point, no.
Okay, so that's something presumably that happens later in the piece after the planning permit has been granted?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. Does the building have the required car parking, and what is the purpose of the Undercroft learning space?
I can take this one. So the car parking matches the existing car parking that's on site. And in terms of the Undercroft space, so that's a space that we need to have regardless. So that's for deliveries and so services type things. So the idea is that given that we need to have this space anyway, we could make the most of it and try and give it some other uses which are more beneficial to the community. So it could be, you know, small gatherings. There's a potential for learning spaces out the back, men's shed type activities and things like that.
Okay. Thank you. And the last in the almost the last of the Q&A. Can we add some low shrubbery to soften the front? And that comes back to Joan's, I think, comment also.
So we do have a landscape architect engaged. So through this last phase, we'll be working with him as well as with the Indigenous groups to develop the plant selections in that front field park. So there will be more than just the one tree. There will be some landscaping and planting around. But the details of this isn't quite confirmed yet.
Okay, thank you. And the front elevation question again, incorporating the post office, is that something that can be produced, or is that what's the thought of that?
Yes, we can produce that during the next phase. We did actually have images such as that previously in the project. But just at this point, we don't have one with the current iteration of the design, so we can produce that.
Great, thanks, Kelsey. And I'll just quickly go through the chat, just pick up any that have not already been covered. I think we have covered all of the questions in the chat there. And look, we only went 8 minutes over, so well done everyone. Some really great questions, and thank you to all of the panelists for your answers. There will be opportunity to ask further questions by sending an email to info@queenscliffe.vic.gov.au, correct, Connor?
Yeah, that's correct. So if you do have questions after this presentation that pop up, there's some information on Council's website. So I've just popped the details of that in the chat here. That's queenscliffe.vic.gov.au/hub. And that also includes some detail on how you can ask additional questions. So you can send us an email, you can write us a letter with any additional questions you have, and we can follow them up for you. You can also view the plans and the renderings that were presented today on the website. And we are currently recording this session. So after the presentation, within the next 24 hours, hopefully, we'll make a recording available on the website as well. So you can watch the presentation back if you'd like to review any of the detail that was presented today again.
Great, thank you. I'm going to throw back to Philip to wind us up. But before that, I'd just like to thank everybody. This rotten pandemic has thwarted our every move in terms of meeting face-to-face people. With each stage, we were able to have the open house in the first stage, and each stage going on, we've been hoping to be able to get to meet with members of the public. And it has stopped us being able to do that at every stage. So we do appreciate your patience. We appreciate your involvement today, and your understanding that COVID got in the way of us being able to have engagement as it should be done, I suppose. Pass back to you, Philip.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks everybody for participating today, for taking a big chunk of time out of the middle of your day, and thank you for your questions and your suggestions and contributions. If you have any other input, as Connor has said, we're happy to receive that. Joan and Zelda, you asked a few follow-up questions about the toilets. I'm happy to talk to you separately about that. The normal planning process for objections will now take place. So once again, thanks everybody, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.